Hey guys, how's it going? It's Andy from Magoo Investing. Welcome back to Robinhood Top Stocks. In this episode, we're going to be talking about a video that I've been putting off for a long time. Today, we're going to be talking about Tilray, ticker symbol TLRY. And so Tilray is a medical marijuana company based out of Canada, and it was actually the first stock to IPO on the stock exchange and the New York Stock Exchange. So it's kind of had that special place in stock trading for weed stocks. The problem is it's had a crazy history since its IPO'd at $17. It went from 17 to 300 and back down to 17. So in this episode, we're going to be breaking down just kind of weed stocks as a whole. I'm going to talk about my own personal experience trading Tilray, and then I'm going to talk about just the future of weed stocks in general and what I see as any short or long-term potential plays. Before we get started, I got to say that I'm not a licensed financial advisor, and I'd highly recommend talking to a professional, someone that can find you the best places to put your money going forward. In addition, I'd really appreciate if you guys hit that like and subscribe button, as it would help my channel out a lot. Also, because I had to do a lot of research on weed stocks overall for this video. So this is definitely a video I've been putting off for a long time. When I've started the series Robinhood Top Stocks, when you look at the top stocks on Robinhood, the top stock is a weed stock. And it's been asked a decent amount of times for me to talk about them and what I think about them. Just the problem is weed stocks as a whole are just getting destroyed recently. When you talk about really risky investments, most people talk a lot about cryptocurrency. But when you look at Bitcoin, it's up over 100% year to date, and pretty much all the weed stocks are down 50 to 75% year to date. And so there's a lot of problems that are hurting weed stocks, and it's also kind of the fact that they're very cheap, and being able to trade them on Robinhood with just single shares makes it most likely why they're the most popular stocks on the site. So one of the reasons that I'm talking about Tilray and not Canopy or Aurora Cannabis is just for the fact that mainly the weed stocks kind of get traded as a whole. And so anytime one stock has good news or bad news, it kind of pushes or pulls everything up or down depending on what the news is. And so I'm talking about Tilray just because it's one that I have personal experience with, and I think it has a fascinating story. And so what does this mean that they're all being traded together? And most likely it means that people that are trading them don't know enough about individual companies to pick a favorite, and they're just moving the whole market as a whole. So it would be something like a car company comes out and has good news, and then all of the other car companies shoot up just because there was good car news, so all the car stocks have to go up. And so that kind of tells me that people don't know enough about the industry to make well-informed decisions on what are the best companies. And so when I look at the weed stocks overall, one of the important things I looked at was market cap. And so Tilray is pretty popular. Unfortunately, it has the 8th largest market cap. And so I talked about this in my pharmaceutical company video, that if you're investing in a sector that you don't have a lot of confidence or knowledge in, I think it's very important to take a position in the stock or the company that has the most name recognition or has the largest market cap. And when we talk about Tilray being the 8th largest, it kind of does not make me super confident. If this was an industry that was doing super well, and maybe I was trying to pick one that is undervalued, that'd be a great idea. Unfortunately, Tilray has just been destroyed as a stock and just the whole industry overall. So 2018 was a crazy year for the medical marijuana and the cannabis stocks. And one of the main reasons was the legalization of weed in Canada. And so that was big news. In addition, some of the big news stories has been a lot of major like soft drink companies like Coca-Cola, and there's a couple other ones that are partnering with these medical marijuana companies trying to come out with a weed-infused beverage. And so anytime that happened, I specifically remember the Coca-Cola one, where it pushed all of the weed stocks up, even though it hasn't really come to fruition yet. And so you have all these news that are kind of inflating these stocks, and then the products never really make it to market. So you kind of get a bubble of it pushing it up, and then people are like, so when's it coming? And then it doesn't come, and the stock just falls because the good news ended up not being really anything. And people are just seeing the headlines and pushing the whole industry up overall. And so just on the smaller investing platforms like Robinhood and Stash, it makes sense why a lot of weed stocks are being traded. For a younger person that's coming into investing, a lot of these ads for these companies, specifically Stash, is they have a lot of ads that say, it only takes $5 to get started. Oh, and you can invest in legal marijuana. And I'm sure a lot of kids are like, okay, that sounds kind of cool. Never thought I'd be able to do that. And then they throw a couple dollars in there. And so the problem is people are getting involved in investing in just horrible industries. If you get someone that's brand new to investing, if someone's going into cryptocurrency or the medical marijuana companies, they're going to be hurt, and they're probably not going to have good sentiment about just investing overall. You'd much rather someone get involved in some well-known companies that are not going to be falling 80% in 1 year. So I think that's just kind of a fault of just how new investors look at it, and kind of the way that medical marijuana companies have been advertised to young investors. And so now that I've kind of talked about the problems with the industry overall, let's talk about Tilray and just kind of the history that it's had. And so it IPO'd in 2018 at $17, and it kind of pushed up. Mainly the bubble was formed based off of first stock to IPO on the New York Stock Exchange, pushes it up because that's brand new news. That's really cool. Medical marijuana becomes legal in Canada, or just weed becomes legal in Canada, pushes the stock up, and then you get probably one of the craziest days on the stock market. And so this was back in the days where I was day trading a decent amount. So I would kind of sit on my computer with Twitter open, looking at different stock feeds, and Tilray popped up onto my feed. And the reason it popped up was because it was up 50% pre-market, and that's just that's a crazy amount. So I started watching it, and me being the naive investor I was, or I guess I wasn't an investor at that point, I was a day trader, I saw 50%, I was like, oh man, this is pretty interesting. I was in a Discord chat where people were talking about it, and everyone was just talking about it. It was no other stocks were being mentioned. So I ended up taking a position at I think $145, ended up falling down to $80. And I was like, wow, that's a easy way to lose some money. And then it pushed up to $250, and I sold for 100% profit pretty easily, nothing involved in that. And so in that day, the stock went from $150 up to $300, and then back down to like $175. So it was just a crazy range. And I remember just kind of sitting there at the end of the day, and I was like, man, I made a lot of money, and I didn't really do a lot. And then this will kind of transition into a future video I'll make talking about why I don't day trade anymore. Kind of gave me a false sense of security on how good I was at day trading. In reality, I got really lucky. But Tilray has that history of going from $17 to $300 in just a couple months, and now it's back to $17. So one of the main problems hurting Tilray and just a lot of the other weed companies is that they're just burning through money. When you look at the earnings for many of these companies, I think Aurora Cannabis was the only one that was pretty close to level for earnings per share. Tilray has just been burning money, and they've been missing earnings for the past 6 quarters, and things don't look to be improving. When you look at the kind of the outlook for the next couple months or the next couple quarters for the stock, it looks positive because the bars are getting higher. They think they're going to be making more money. The problem is making more money, but they're still in the red. So they're still burning through money, and that's kind of one of the major problems that's affecting this industry. When we talk about legal weed in Canada, it kind of seems like a great thing at the beginning. Problem is, it appears that Canada has been very slow in implementing just the ability of giving out licenses to sell legal weed. And so you have very few places to buy the weed. I saw some articles saying that in the province of Ontario, the largest of Canada's provinces with 14 million people, there are 25 dispensaries total. And so the college town that I live in has 50,000 people, and I did a quick Google search, and there are 13 dispensaries for 50,000 people. So that just kind of shows the scale of how lacking they are in physical places to buy this legal weed. In addition, when you have black market weed that's out there, it's not being taxed, it's not being regulated. From what I saw, it's between 40 and 45% cheaper. And so if you have a reliable way to buy weed that's not from a physical store, it's probably gonna be a lot cheaper. So that's just a lot of the factors that are hurting these weed companies. And then finally, I'll talk about the money aspect. And so I talked about how Tilray is burning through money. And another problem is in the United States, marijuana is still considered a Schedule I drug. And so that puts it up with stuff like LSD, heroin, these horrible drugs. And then you have weed on there. And basically what that means for these companies is that it is still considered illegal through the federal government. And so that means that these companies, as they're opening up different dispensaries, they don't have access to many financial just luxuries that most businesses have. And so basically that means they can't open up bank accounts because it's still illegal through the federal government. And when you have these massive banks that are kind of working throughout the country, they're not allowed to open up accounts for these weed companies. And so the only ability that these dispensaries have for opening up bank accounts is through very small banks that are just in the local area. So you don't have the luxuries of having a massive bank behind you to give out loans and that type of stuff and just support you. So they have to deal in cash. They aren't allowed to have bank accounts with these massive banks, and they're just they're struggling in every aspect of it. And now I've talked about kind of the fundamentals of the weed industry and kind of how Tilray has struggled. Now let's go talk on the charts, and I'll just kind of go through the past couple years since Tilray has IPO'd and just talk about what I see as the future for the company. All right, so here we are looking at Tilray today. Ticker symbol TLRY, with 40,000 people owning it on Robinhood. I think it's really interesting that they put the weed stocks in engineering, because as you click on here, you see Aurora Cannabis, GE, Kronos, which is another weed stock, Canopy Growth, weed stock, AMD, It's kind of interesting that they put them in there. Anyway, you can see that it has a 67% hold rating, up 1.5% today, down 9% a week, down 16% in the month, down 41% 3-month, down 79% in the year, and then down 24% in the 4-year or in the 5-year chart. As you can see, that's the peak we're going to be talking about when it came up. This shows where it closed at $145. So it's at a pretty crazy range. Has no dividend. Pretty small market cap of 1.8 billion. When you compare that to some of the other weed companies, I think it's number 8. As we come down here, they have it as a 33% buy and 67% hold, which I think is really interesting. And here is kind of the main problem of the company is it's burning through money. Its earnings last quarter down 50 cents per share, which is not great to see. And then as you come in here, you can see my history of, let's see, first order, I bought at 224, which is not good. Then I bought another share at 209. And then sold at 237, bought at 142, and then sold at 163. So a pretty good day for me. That was one of the more interesting days on the stock market. Let's go take a look at the charts. So we're going to start on my favorite chart, the 4-hour 180-day. And you might look at this and go, you haven't drawn any levels on here. Yeah, it's just kind of been in free fall for a while. I'm sure I could probably draw something. Could probably put something around here. But until the stock kind of recovers, it's still steadily been going down. Until it consolidates, that's when you start drawing out levels. A 1 to 2 day consolidation isn't really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a longer term so I can put a more solid support, because based off of the track record it's had, we'll go to 1 year. You can see just how far it's fallen. And when it falls for so long, drawing a support and then that's touched a couple times, not a great idea, because it'll just push right through that. So you have to be very certain about a support and resistance on a stock that's fallen so far in a year. But as we go further back to the 10-year 1 day, which obviously it hasn't been around for that long, you can see the crazy day that it had in September of 2018. And so as we come in here, you can see that it had a low of 150 and a high of 300. And it opened at 214 and closed at 235. So the range during the day was pretty crazy. One of the more interesting days on the stock market. But you can see that it IPO'd around $17. It pushes up. The bubble pushes it up to $300. Bubble bursts, falls. After a big event like this, you have it recover a little bit. And then after that, it just kind of starts the continual free fall. So not really a lot to talk about on the charts for zones. I just like showing this off because it's one of the craziest days I've ever seen on the stock market. And I was actually a part of it. So also you can see how crazy the volume was here. When it has 30 million shares sold or bought and sold per day or in that 1 day. And normal is like between 1 and 5. It's pretty interesting. All right, so Tilray overall would not go anywhere near it. I think the weed industry is a fascinating thing, and I hope that they fix all of the problems that they've had. The problem is I don't see an end to that coming anytime soon. Unless weed becomes legal nationally in the United States, Canada fixes the problems that they've already had, I think it's going to be a long way until these stocks are a decent buy. Obviously, when you look at the stock and people are going to say, oh, it's at a great discount. You've seen the history that Tilray's had. It went from 17 to 300. That's incredible. But then you also see that it's just been sliding ever since it reached that mark. So I think weed stocks will be profitable in the future. I just think we're 5 years away from that, maybe even longer. There's so many problems in this industry that need to be fixed until you have the ability to start making money. Another problem is it's just so saturated with all these companies trying to jump up and be a part of this brand new industry, which is super cool. The problem is none of them are really succeeding. And so you're going to have a lot of companies that are probably going to go out of business because they don't have the support that's needed for these brand new businesses. And so weed companies overall, in addition to Tilray, I think are a no-go for years to come. I enjoy watching them. I think it's really interesting to see what happens. But for people that are trying to make money and invest for the long term, I think that weed stocks are not a great idea. The only caveat I would put on that is if you are dead set on investing in weed stocks, I would highly recommend taking a look at MJ, which is an ETF. And so an ETF for weed stocks, from the stuff I've said, doesn't seem super important, just based off the fact that if one weed stock goes up, all of them go up, and if they go down, they all go down. And that's kind of what an ETF does. The problem, or the difference with MJ, is that it doesn't have as much risk from what I've seen. When you look at a lot of these companies year to date, Tilray is down 70%, Aurora is down like 55, 60. MJ is only down 35%, which is something to celebrate because it's not the worst. And so if you can find a way to invest in this industry that you care about and kind of minimize as much risk as possible, I think MJ is something that people should be looking at. And let me know what you think about Tilray overall, just kind of the medical marijuana and just the legal marijuana companies overall. And let me know if there are any diamonds in the rough out there, just weed companies that you want me to take a look at because you think their books are really good and you think the potential is there. From what I've seen, just as the industry as a whole, I think it's got a long way to go. It's in the infancy for sure, but I think years from now, things will be good. I'm just very curious to see how many of these companies can survive long enough to make it to a period where these companies can survive and even thrive. So let me know what you think about weed stocks overall, and I'll see you in the next episode of Robinhood Top Stocks. Thanks for watching.